My friends, I want to tell you something today, something that will touch your heart, lift your spirit, and give you strength for the journey ahead. I don't know what burdens you carried with you when you woke up this morning, but I know this: you don't have to carry them alone. Maybe you're standing at a crossroads in life, wondering which way to go. Maybe doors have slammed shut in your face and you feel like there's no way forward. Maybe you're sitting in the silence, waiting, praying, hoping for something to change. But I want you to know this today: God will open the right door, so don't worry. We live in a world full of uncertainty. People are anxious, troubled, afraid of what the future holds. The economy rises and falls, nations rage, families struggle, and people's hearts are heavy. But in the midst of all this, there is a truth that remains unchanged. God is still on the throne. He is still in control. He sees you. He knows your name. He knows the number of hairs on your head, and He has not forgotten you. Many of you may feel like you are standing in a hallway filled with closed doors. You've tried to push one open, but it wouldn't budge. You knocked on another, but no one answered. And now maybe you're tired, maybe you feel like giving up. But let me tell you something. Just because a door is closed doesn't mean God has abandoned you. He is preparing the right door, the right opportunity, the right blessing in His perfect time. The Bible says in Revelation 3:8, I have set before you an open door which no one is able to shut. That's the promise of God. When He opens a door, no man, no situation, no power of hell can close it. And when He closes a door, it's for your protection, for your good, even if you don't understand it right now. Think about Joseph in the Bible. God had given him a dream. He had a vision of his future. But before he ever stepped into that promise, what happened? He was thrown into a pit by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and put in prison. If anyone had reason to doubt, to worry, to wonder if God had abandoned him, it was Joseph. But through it all, God was working. Every closed door was leading him to the right door. The door that would place him in the palace where he would fulfill the calling God had placed on his life. And what about Moses? God had called him to lead His people out of Egypt, but what happened? Pharaoh's heart was hardened. The people grumbled. The Red Sea stood before them, blocking their path. But God was never worried. God was never late. At the right moment, He made a way where there was no way. The sea parted, and they walked through on dry ground. That's the God we serve, a God who makes a way, a God who opens the right doors. Some of you have been waiting for a long time. You've been praying for that opportunity, for that breakthrough, for that answer. And maybe you're starting to wonder, God, do you hear me? Do you see me? Have you forgotten me? Let me tell you something. God's delays are not His denials. Just because you haven't seen the answer yet doesn't mean He's not working. Just because the door hasn't opened yet doesn't mean it never will. In the book of Isaiah, God says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. You see, we think we know what's best. We think we know which door we need to walk through. But God, in His infinite wisdom, sees the full picture. He sees what's on the other side of that door. And sometimes in His love, He closes doors to keep us from harm, from distraction, from something less than His best. Maybe you wanted that job, but the door closed. Maybe you thought that relationship was the one, but it ended. Maybe you had a dream that didn't come to pass the way you expected. Can I tell you something? If that door closed, it wasn't the right door for you. If God allowed it to shut, it's because He has something better. He has something greater. He has something beyond what you could ask or imagine. God's timing is perfect. We live in an instant world. instant messages, instant meals, instant access to almost anything we want. But God doesn't work on our timeline. He is never in a hurry, and He is never late. When the time is right, He will open the door. And when He does, you won't have to force it open. You won't have to strive. You won't have to manipulate circumstances to make it happen. It will swing wide open in His power and His strength and in His grace. I want to encourage you today, don't grow weary in the waiting. Don't let worry steal your peace. God is working behind the scenes even when you can't see it, even when you don't feel it. He is moving. He is aligning things. He is preparing you for what He has prepared for you. Maybe today you're standing in front of a closed door and you're tempted to doubt. You're tempted to be afraid. But I want to remind you, God is faithful. He has never failed, and He won't start now. The same God who opened the door for Joseph, the same God who made a way for Moses, the same God who walked with Daniel in the lion's den is walking with you. He has a plan for you, a purpose for you, and He will open the right door at the right time. So don't let worry consume you. Don't let fear dictate your steps. Trust in the one who holds your future. Trust in the one who opens doors that no man can shut. And when that door opens, walk through it in faith, knowing that He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Keep your heart anchored in His promises. And remember, God will open the right door. So don't worry. I hear so many people say, I just don't know what to do. I don't know where to go next. Every door I try to walk through seems to close in front of me. Maybe that's you today. Maybe you've knocked and knocked, but nothing is opening. Maybe you've tried different paths, different opportunities, but none of them have led where you thought they would. You wonder if God has forgotten you, if He sees what you're going through. But let me tell you, God is never caught off guard. He knows exactly where you are, and He knows exactly where He's leading you. There's a story in the Bible about Paul and Silas. They were on a missionary journey going from town to town preaching the gospel. They had plans to go into certain regions, but the Bible says that the Holy Spirit stopped them. The door was closed. Can you imagine? Here they were, trying to do God's work, trying to spread His message, and yet God Himself prevented them from going forward. But do you know why? Because He had a different plan. That night, Paul had a vision of a man in Macedonia calling out for help, and Paul knew this was the door God wanted him to walk through. Sometimes we have good plans, even godly plans, but they aren't the right plans. We think we know what's best, but God in His infinite wisdom redirects us. That's why some doors don't open. That's why some things don't work out the way we expect. Not because God is punishing us, not because He has forgotten us, but because He has something better in store. I want you to think about something. What if every door you thought you needed to walk through actually led to destruction? What if every opportunity you thought you wanted would have ended in disappointment? God sees what we cannot see. He knows the end from the beginning. He knows which doors will bless you and which doors will break you. And because He loves you, He will not let you walk through the wrong one. So instead of getting frustrated when things don't go your way, trust in God's timing. Trust in His process. Sometimes the waiting is just as important as the answer. Sometimes God is preparing you, shaping you, refining you so that when He opens the right door, you will be ready to walk through it. The Bible tells us about David, a young shepherd boy who was anointed to be king. But do you know what happened after he was anointed? Did he go straight to the throne? No, he went back to the fields. He spent years tending sheep. He fought lions and bears. He served in Saul's palace, and still he had to wait. Saul tried to kill him, and David had to run for his life. If anyone had reason to doubt, to question God's plan, it was David. But God was working. God was preparing him. The delays, the hardships, the struggles, they weren't wasted. They were shaping David into the king he was meant to be. Maybe today you feel like David. Maybe you know that God has something for you, but it seems like every door is shut. Maybe you're in a season of waiting, a season of difficulty. But can I tell you something? The same God who was faithful to David is faithful to you. The same God who took a shepherd boy and placed him on a throne is leading you right now. Don't let the closed doors discourage you. Don't let the delays make you doubt. I remember hearing the story of a man who desperately wanted a certain job. He prayed, he fasted, he believed with all his heart that this was the opportunity for him. But the door never opened. Someone else was chosen. He was heartbroken. But you know what happened? A few months later, that company shut down. If he had gotten the job, he would have been left with nothing. But God, in His wisdom, had a different plan. How many times in your life has God saved you from something even when you didn't understand it at the time? Maybe there was a relationship you thought would last forever, but it ended. Maybe there was a dream you chased after, but it never came to pass. At the time, it was painful, but looking back, you can see that God was protecting you, guiding you, leading you to something greater. God's ways are higher than our ways. We see only a small piece of the picture, but God sees it all. We see the obstacle in front of us, but God sees the breakthrough on the other side. That's why we must trust Him. That's why we must walk by faith and not by sight. I think of Abraham, the father of faith. God told him to leave everything behind and go to a land that He would show him. Abraham didn't know where he was going, but he trusted God. And what happened? God led him. God provided for him. God fulfilled His promises. Maybe God is asking you to trust Him today. Maybe He's asking you to let go of your worry, to stop trying to force open doors that aren't meant for you, and to simply rest in Him. Worry will drain you. It will steal your joy. It will keep you up at night, rob you of peace, and make you doubt God's goodness. But when you choose to trust in the Lord, when you choose to believe that He is in control, you can rest. You can have peace. God has never failed, and He won't start now. The same God who parted the Red Sea, the same God who shut the mouths of lions, the same God who walked with the 3 Hebrew boys in the fire is with you. He is leading you, He is guiding you, and when the time is right, He will open the door. So don't worry, don't be afraid. Don't lose heart. You may not see it yet, but God is working. You may not understand it, but He is moving on your behalf. The door He has for you is already prepared, and when it opens, nothing and no one will be able to close it. So stand firm. Keep the faith. Keep your eyes on Jesus, because He who promised is faithful, and He will never let you down. I want to tell you today that the God who created the heavens and the earth is the same God who is ordering your steps. He is not distant. He is not far off. He is near to you, closer than your very breath, watching over you, guiding you, leading you, and preparing the way before you. You may not see it now, but God has already gone ahead of you. He has already put things in motion. He has already set divine appointments, opened doors you don't even know exist, and made a way where there seems to be no way. So often we let our limited understanding dictate how we view God's plan. We measure our circumstances by what we can see, by what makes sense to us. But God is not limited by what we can see. He is not confined by our understanding. He is the God who spoke the world into existence. He is the God who called light out of darkness. He is the God who breathed life into Adam. who split the Red Sea, who brought water from a rock, and who raised the dead to life. There is nothing too hard for him. There is no situation beyond his power. There is no door that he cannot open. But the problem is, we don't like to wait. We don't like uncertainty. We want answers now. We want solutions immediately. We want every step laid out before us so we don't have to wonder, so we don't have to trust. But God doesn't work that way. He calls us to live by faith. He calls us to trust Him even when we don't understand, even when the door remains closed, even when the way forward seems impossible. Look at the story of Noah. God told him to build an ark, but it had never rained before. There was no flood in sight. Can you imagine how foolish Noah must have looked to the people around him? Can you imagine how many times he must have questioned himself? Yet Noah obeyed. He kept building, he kept trusting, and when the time came, God fulfilled His word. Look at the story of the Israelites. God promised them a land flowing with milk and honey, but before they could enter it, they had to go through the wilderness. For 40 years they wandered. For 40 years they faced trials, difficulties, and battles. Some of them grew weary and lost faith. Some of them doubted. But those who trusted in God, those who remained faithful, saw the promise fulfilled. Maybe today you feel like you're in the wilderness. Maybe you feel like you've been waiting forever, like the promises of God are delayed, like you're stuck in a season that will never end. But can I tell you something? The wilderness is not the end of your story. The waiting is not wasted. God is using this time to prepare you, to strengthen you, to deepen your faith, so that when He opens the right door, you will be ready to walk through it. We often think that if something doesn't happen on our timeline, it means it won't happen at all. But God is not bound by time. He is eternal. He sees the end from the beginning. And when the time is right, He will move, He will act, He will fulfill His promises in a way that is greater than anything you could have imagined. Think about the story of Lazarus. When Jesus received word that his friend was sick, He didn't rush to heal him. He waited, and in that waiting, Lazarus died. Can you imagine how Mary and Martha must have felt? Can you imagine their heartbreak, their confusion? They had called for Jesus, but He hadn't come. They must have wondered, why didn't He show up? Why did He let this happen? But Jesus had a plan. He had something greater in store. When He arrived, Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. It seemed hopeless. It seemed like the door had been permanently shut. But Jesus stood before that tomb and called out, "Lazarus, come forth." And the man who had been dead walked out alive. You see, sometimes God allows things to look impossible so that when He moves, there will be no doubt that it was His power, His glory, and His divine hand at work. Sometimes He allows doors to close so that when He opens the right one, there will be no question that it was Him who made the way. Maybe you've experienced disappointment. Maybe you've faced rejection. Maybe you've knocked on doors that never opened, sent out applications that never got a response, pursued dreams that never seemed to come to life. But can I tell you something? God's plans for you are better than anything you could plan for yourself. He knows what is best for you. He knows what will bless you. He knows what will bring you joy, peace, and fulfillment. We serve a God who does not make mistakes. He does not forget His children. He does not leave prayers unanswered. Every no you have received, every closed door, every delay, it all has a purpose. God is working all things together for your good. Maybe today you feel stuck. Maybe you feel like nothing is happening. But let me tell you something. Just because you don't see movement doesn't mean God isn't working. The roots of a tree grow deep before the branches ever stretch toward the sky. The foundation of a building is laid before the structure ever rises. In the same way, God is working in the unseen places of your life. He is strengthening your faith, preparing your heart, setting things in order so that when He opens the right door, you will be ready to walk through it with confidence. You don't have to strive. You don't have to force things to happen. You don't have to manipulate situations or try to open doors in your own strength. If the door is from God, it will open at the right time, and when it does, nothing and no one will be able to shut it. So what do you do while you wait? You trust. You worship. You remain faithful. You continue walking in obedience. You keep your eyes on Jesus, knowing that He is leading you. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 3:5-6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your path. That's a promise. He will direct your steps. He will lead you to the right door. You may not understand everything right now, but you don't have to. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to see the full picture. All you have to do is trust in the one who holds your future in His hands. God is faithful. He has never failed, and He won't start now. The same God who was with Moses, the same God who was with David, the same God who walked with the disciples is with you. He is working in your life right now. He is opening doors that no one can shut. So do not be discouraged. Do not be afraid. Do not grow weary. The door God has for you will open in His perfect timing, and when it does, it will be greater than anything you could have ever imagined. Keep trusting, keep believing, keep holding on to His promises, because the God who started a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. I want you to know that no delay, no detour, and no disappointment can cancel God's purpose for your life. The enemy would love to make you think that because things aren't happening as quickly as you expected, God has forgotten you. He would love to whisper lies in your ear, telling you that the closed doors mean God has abandoned you. But let me remind you, God never abandons His children. He never leaves, never forsakes, never withdraws His hand from those who trust in Him. And sometimes what feels like rejection is actually God's redirection. He is closing the wrong doors so you won't waste your time on what wasn't meant for you. He is keeping you from lesser things so that you can step into the greater things He has prepared. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 55:8-9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." You may not understand why things are happening the way they are, but you can trust that God knows what He is doing. Think about Joseph. He had a dream that one day he would be in a position of great influence. But before that dream was fulfilled, he was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. Can you imagine how discouraged he must have felt? Can you imagine how many times he must have wondered why God allowed him to go through such hardships? But what Joseph didn't realize at the time was that every closed door, every painful moment was leading him closer to the promise. In the end, Joseph was raised up to a position of power, and he was able to look back and say, what the enemy meant for evil, God meant for good. The same is true in your life. God is not ignoring you. He is not punishing you. He is preparing you. He is positioning you. He is working behind the scenes in ways you cannot see, and when the right door opens, it will make sense. When the right opportunity comes, you will see that every delay had a purpose. Every closed door was part of His perfect plan. Every moment of waiting was necessary to bring you into the fullness of what God has in store. So don't give up. Don't let worry consume you. Don't let doubt take root in your heart. God is faithful, and in His perfect timing, He will open the right door, and nothing will be able to stop His plan for your life. So, my friend, take heart. The waiting, the closed doors, the disappointments, they are not the end of your story. They are simply part of the journey. God is still in control. He is still working behind the scenes, aligning the right people, the right opportunities, and the right circumstances to bring His perfect plan to pass in your life. You don't have to live in fear. You don't have to strive. You don't have to worry about what's next. The God who holds the universe in His hands is holding your future. And when the time is right, He will open the right door, and no force on earth will be able to shut it. So keep trusting, keep believing, keep walking in faith, because the one who has called you is faithful, and He will do it. And when that door opens, you'll look back and see that every delay, every detour, and every disappointment was simply God leading you to something far greater than you ever imagined. Stay faithful, stay patient, and watch as God opens the right door in His perfect timing.